Hi, I want to thank everyone who's listening to my presentation today, and also to the conference organizers who have worked to make all of this possible online. What I'm presenting today is an analysis of two artworks that emerges from my ongoing study on artistic practices that contend with human and non-human relations and the ecological crisis. I'm going to start by introducing my aim and general questions before briefly discussing my interpretive framework, so the general ideas that shape the ways that I think about my case studies. These include ideas on the planetary and practices of listening. I then turn to the artworks, which include Leah Barclay's Wara from 2015, a geolocated audio walk along the Noosa River, and Calder Harbin's Bodies of Water from 2017, a low-frequency audio installation that engages with the violence of ocean noise pollution. The aim of this analysis is to investigate listening as a form of sentient engagement with the planetary in contemporary sound installations. I am asking how the artistic strategies used in these two artworks hint towards the planetary, or how they attend to the incommensurable, the unjust, and the yet to be recognized. I ask how they bring us to rethink the ways in which we listen and thus relate to more than human soundscapes that are seemingly distant, but nevertheless entangled with and impacted by human activity. I essentially question how we reckon with what we have not necessarily been trained to acknowledge, understand, interpret, or even perceive. To answer these questions, I follow Jennifer Gabrice's conceptualization of the planetary. She is among those who have argued that we must move away from imagining the Earth as a totality, as an entity that can seemingly be captured and managed. She suggests that becoming planetary requires moving away from the satellite view of the much referenced images of Earthrise or blue marble as shown here, and towards more entangled environments. The planetary, she writes, can be a different figure for undoing the totality of globes and globality. Rather than bringing the Earth into view as a total object, the planetary remains that which cannot be fixed or settled. The planetary resists representation. This is important because for Gabrice, to know the planet can be a way to fix it as a figure of analysis and management. And this stability, she argues, can be seen as a way to rid the planet of alterity, to make it knowable and so manageable within a universal science. Alternatively, to become planetary is a way to consider how the planetary is not a uniform or fixed set of conditions, but rather signals conditions of difference as well as collective responsibility and possibility with and through those differences. This conception of what it means to become planetary is what I will argue the artists reckon with through the practices of listening that they develop in their respective installations. It is then worth dwelling a bit on the act of listening itself and how it may be a productive form of engagement with the planetary. Those who encounter the installations bring with them various understandings of what is audible or sensible, and of how to listen to the unintelligible or even the seemingly unperceivable. In Hungry Listening, Dylan Robinson explains that the listening continuum has historically been consigned to a framework wherein one is listening well if one is able to capture the content of what is spoken. He more precisely argues that settler colonial listening, which he calls hungry listening, avoids certain kinds of listening experience, and especially ones that would affirm human and non-human relationships. It prioritizes the capture and certainty of information over the affective feel, timbre, touch, and texture of sound. In this sense, settler colonial modes of listening and norms of intelligibility can reproduce the transparent logics of the satellite view. To redress this perceptual logic, which Robinson contends could not only lessen epistemological violence, but also be ethically relevant in rethinking human relations to the planet, requires dislocating the fixity and goal-oriented teleology of listening and exploring more flexible and unusual listening practices. It requires frames for listening that do not treat it as a single sense activity while resisting, as Robinson puts it, the hunger to consume alterity. As such, listening has the potential to become a sentient mode of engagement with the Earth that resists its capture and rather hints towards the planetary. In what follows, I considered the strategies used by two artists to develop such practices. I'll start by looking at Australian sound artist and researcher Leah Barclay's Wara. To experience this work, one must walk along the Noosa River and listen to sound recordings from a mobile device and earphones. The artist used hydrophones to record and stream the sounds emitted by waves, bellbirds, shrimp, mud crabs, and dolphins, among other beings that inhabit the river. She equally recorded the voices of artists, activists, conservationists, and local Indigenous leaders who are variously tied to the river. The recordings, which can be heard at irregular intervals between the Noosa Regional Gallery and the mouth of the river, are all geotagged to a specific part of the riverbank. For example, a recording of snapping shrimp becomes louder as one approaches the jetty and so closer to where the shrimp are indeed located. Barclay uses two main strategies for framing the submerged sounds of the Noosa River. The first consists of layering and interweaving sounds into polyphonic compositions, at times making individual sounds intangible. In some of the recorded and composed sound clips, Barclay overlays human and non-human voices. Recorded independently or together, the sounds are layered to create some of the work's most textured audio compositions. Live streams are also layered onto some of the constructed clips, complicating the work's temporal scales. Some of the compositions are made up of binaural recordings, meaning they were recorded using two microphones. Such recordings are used to hallucinatory effect, blurring the distinction between live and pre-recorded realities, and giving the listener the impression that sounds are coming from multiple directions. In a particular sound clip, part of which I will play in a second, we hear a man, Lyndon Davis, talking about the history of the Noosa River, though his voice is rapidly obscured by the noise of mud crabs that become increasingly loud.
Find food to survive. We all live here, we're all human beings, we all have the same sort of purpose, looking after the earth.
As you can hear, familiar words continue to be heard, but they become harder to hear as non-human sounds take over, and this is the result of Barclay's layering technique. A second compositional strategy employed by Barclay in the sound clips involves isolating non-human voices instead of layering them. In some recordings, the artist seemingly isolates the voices of river organisms, making them seem even stranger and bringing listeners to attend to underwater animals that cannot be heard on land. For example, here's a part of a recording called Snapping Shrimp. The artist doesn't offer, if it were even possible, any translation or interpretation as to what the animals are communicating. The act of listening to snapping shrimp through hydrophone recordings asks us to reckon with a certain opacity or unfamiliarity, and raises some of the questions posed earlier. How do we listen to what we have not been trained to acknowledge, understand, or interpret? Can listening to what can never fully be captured or comprehended still be productive? I argue that Barclay's invitation to listen to the untranslated or the untranslatable is generative for thinking about what it might mean to become planetary, and thus also challenge the transparent logic of the satellite view. The second installation, which I will now introduce, moves beyond representing planetary relations and beings as murky and opaque, and uses listening as a sensing modality through which we can begin to think about our limited human ability to even perceive such relations. It is a sound installation by Kalder Harben, an artist currently based in Denmark, titled Bodies of Water. The work's audio is also composed of hydrophone recordings from different underwater locations, such as the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Ontario, that document low-frequency noises of industry and traffic in marine environments. It is then worth dwelling on the context of noise pollution, as it is how Harben attends to the planetary and its unjust modes of coexistence. The level of noise pollution in the ocean is increasing, which means that anthropogenic sounds are increasingly disrupting the acoustic ecologies of the world's bodies of water. The authors of Ecoacoustics, The Ecological Role of Sound, stress the importance of sound to aquatic animals who are especially dependent on the auditory system because they use acoustic signals to enact a wide range of activities, from communicating to locating food and navigating their environments. And despite the harm and disruption that anthropogenic low-frequency noise can cause to marine organisms, it remains mostly inaudible to humans. In fact, low-frequency sounds are often studied as ambient waves, as the unheard vibrations of infrasound, or even as sound-like. In Lalonde theory, Paul Jason notes that low-frequency sounds are often associated with a buzzing confusion of sensation and therefore the enemy of clear auditory perception and, by implication, clear thought. And this is precisely what this installation embraces. Before entering the room housing the installation, viewers were provided with earplugs and a second layer of over-ear protection. This is because even though the artist amplified the low-frequency recordings to the very threshold of human hearing and played them through a subwoofer, a speaker typically used to augment low-frequency sounds, they remain almost inaudible. This does not mean unperceivable, however. The artist claims that the ear protection was offered as an assistive device to help the viewers turn off the ears rather than as any real form of safety guard. They propose that the 2 layers of ear protection that you see here allow a quicker transition into sensing with the body, and the longer a listener is in the space, the more their body might become sensitized to low-frequency sounds. In a review of the artwork, Christian Madsen writes that listening inflicts a certain pain, as the soundscape becomes indistinguishable from your own heartbeat and the thudding of the hearing protection against your temples. Madsen also explains that the vibrations in the space created a slow, sickening rumble that we might imagine could be felt in the depths of waters in which the audio was recorded. To further facilitate this kind of listening, the space itself contained a bench and was bathed in a dark blue hue that limited visual distractions. In a more recent presentation of the work in Copenhagen, a similar blue hue filled the room, but the space was equipped with several inflatable chairs instead of a bench. Filled with air, these chairs more intensely carried, rather than impeded, the vibrations and frequencies of the installation's audio. Bodies of Water then expands the question of how we might listen to what we have not been trained to acknowledge, understand, or interpret, and demands that we consider how we listen to what we cannot audibly perceive, and how we can relate to bodies that perceive differently. While Harbin employs certain aesthetic strategies, from low-frequency audio, the ear protection, the dark room, and so on, that test the limits of human perceptibility and ask people to strain their senses and tune into perhaps under or unexplored modes of listening, I'm certainly not suggesting that the work brings its viewers to transparently know the experience of marine organisms who sense similar sounds. However, more than human sensing modalities are referenced in this work, even if they never become fully accessible. Harbin essentially asks us to rethink what it means to listen well, and to think about what it means to listen with the body, to listen otherwise, and to not treat listening as a single sense activity that prioritizes the capture or reduction of planetary relations and modes of sensing. While both Harbin and Barclay's installations differ in a lot of ways, both ask us to listen to and for what is often obscured or overly simplified, that is, planetary relations. Importantly though, and I will conclude with this, both works perhaps most effectively point towards the planetary by disclosing the incompleteness of their representations of aquatic environments. For instance, in Barclay's Wara, the listener can only encounter the recorded voices of the Noosa River by isolating themselves from other aspects of the environment with the help of a mobile device and earphones. The experience of listening in Harbin's Bodies of Water is equally dependent on the partial isolation of one's senses. The inherent dynamics of sound recordings and playback also discloses certain representational interference or incompleteness. Brandon Labelle has argued that in sound installations, place paradoxically comes to life by being somewhat alien, other, and separate, removed and dislocated rather than being mimetically real. He contends then that to bring a place, in this case an aquatic environment, into proximity with listeners, that is, to make it sensible, one has to contend with the interferences of its very representation and ultimate dislocation. And so, rather than seeking to uncover and make transparently accessible planetary beings and relations, these artworks, with their aesthetics of listening and the inherent qualities of their medium, dwell in a dislocated, opaque, and uncertain space, one in which the Earth does not come into view as a total, fixed, manageable, and knowable object. And perhaps this is not disheartening, but productive in processes of becoming planetary and building more ethical relationships with bodies of water. Thank you.
This presentation is a story of an intimate encounter with water, the stranger threaded through all beings and non-beings, the stranger within us, without which life would not be possible, at least not the life that we know. This story is not linear. It meanders through words, images, sounds, and meanings diffractively. It attempts to read insights through one another. Barat says, reading diffractively is about experimenting with different patterns of relationality, opening things up, turning them over and over again to see how the patterns shift. This is not about solving paradoxes or synthesizing different points of view from the outside, but rather about the material intra-implications of putting oneself at risk, troubling oneself, one's ideas, one's dreams, all the different ways of touching and being in touch, and sensing the differences and entanglements from within. The story starts in a dark place. Imagine entering a dark room. In the pitch black, your eyes hurt. It feels like they grow bigger, become rounder, and stretch to the maximum. And it takes a stretch of imagination to see in the dark. Imagine being submerged in water. Shimmering light passes above and through you, touching your skin and eyes. Sound in and out of sync comes, and at other time pierces through your ear. A cacophony of whispers, screams, gasps, and cries. In the dark, water passes through every cell in your body, carrying oxygen and nutrients through the tiniest blood vessels against gravity. Water transports electrical charges, filling your brain with thoughts that creates a stream of consciousness. A dazzling light, a rain of light drops. Gazing at distant stars, asteroids, or perhaps a solar nebula. Is that the beginning of life? Disoriented, immersed in the darkness of abandoned impossibilities. I listen. You extend your hand. I touch. You touch. For Barat, touch is the most essential way of communication. In fact, she relates the entire pursuits of physics to the question of touch and how we exchange information. How do, for example, particles feel one another? How do they sense each other? Through direct contact? Through another medium such as a void which is never empty? Through a spooky action at a distance? Or through an exchange of energy? In the darkness of quantum vacuum, there is no mass or light, and yet this dark nothing is a seething mass of activity filled with waves of fluctuations from which virtual pairs of particles and antiparticles pop up and disappear. They borrow energy from the vacuum and return it when they annihilate each other. Clearly, mass is not a property of material substance. It is not something that matter has. Rather, it is a behavior of quantum fields. It is what quantum fields do, says science writer Jim Baggett. So matter comes from nothing and disappears into nothing, yet nothing is not nothing, and is full of intra-activity from which all energy we know comes from and returns to. Just like Aboriginal stories of life that comes from and returns to water. By dissolving the boundaries between epistemology and ontology, agentia realism brings forward the notion of relationality where everything, no matter how big or small, matters. And for Barat, matter is substance in its intra-active becoming not a thing, but a doing, a congealing of agency. Matter is a stabilizing and destabilizing process of iterative intra-activity. And intra-actions are enactments through which phenomena manifest themselves, in opposition to intra-actions that imply causality. Because objects exist, relations are possible. Intra-actions point to an already existing relationality. No relations in the absence of object, but no objects in the absence of relations. There are no external factors, no pre-existing agency, relata, or pre-existing objects. There are only relationships, relations that are defined by practices, and practices that defines meanings. And meaning and matters are inseparable. Barat says matter and meaning cannot be disassociated, not by chemical processing or centrifuge or nuclear blast. Mattering is simultaneously a matter of substance and significance, and the ongoing intra-active differentiating of the world. We have always been encountering water, or perhaps I should say that water has always been encountering us. And through these intra-actions, we have produced different cultural, social, and political natures. Anthropologist Veronica Strong describes how in many cultures water is considered a sentient and sacred being. She recounts an Aboriginal story of how human spirits jump up from their ancestral waters to materialize and become visible in human form. At the end of each individual human life cycle, they return to their watery home to be reunited with their ancestors, becoming invisible and so dissolving back into collective formless potential. Today, water has not only stopped being sentient or sacred, but has even stopped being considered as a common good. Instead, water has become a commodity, a resource for profit. In arid coastal mountains area where there is little or no precipitation or access to groundwater, fog becomes the only source of water for plants, animals, and people. Fog is a cloud close to the ground composed of small condensed water droplets big enough to be suspended in the air, but not big enough to be brought down by gravity in the form of rain. The standard model of fog collector uses nets made from Rochelle mesh, which is a mesh similar to a potato or onion bag. However, water gets stuck in the intersection of square grid netting due to surface tension and produces clogging, with water failing to drain into the collection gutter at the base of the net. In our art and science intra-action, we came up with a paradigm shift that has replaced the grid-based meshes with parallel flexible fibers that emerge from the image of a forest, a mirage of vertical lines. From nothingness, a drizzle or a quiet snow or a misty rain or a pelting rain or a stinging sleet or at times a hail materializes and unfolds. It is mesmerizing to see small water droplets becoming visible points in space, emerging on thin lines of flexible threads. They coalesce, slowly grow bigger, and struggle to stay attached in the airflow. When their mass overcomes surface tensions, they give in to gravity and fall. At other times, the water's surface tension brings two adjacent fibers together, creating capillary bridges that then turn into long liquid columns. Different geometries produce different behaviors. Triangulated threads produce a thin film that deforms fibers by bringing them closer together. The film elongates, stretches to the maximum capacity, and breaks, yielding a water drop. A dance, a cycle between rise and fall. Could this be a more efficient way of collecting water from fog? We measure, we weigh, we observe, we repeat, we touch. If matter and intra-action are integral units in continuous flux, always cutting together apart, manifesting, materializing, and excluding in the process, it is impossible not to talk about accountability towards what has been excluded in the action of differentiating. Ethicality for Bharat entails hospitality to the stranger threaded through oneself and through all being and non-being. Ethics is not about responsibility punishable by the morality of wrongs or rights, but rather an intimacy of being there for the other. A practice of engagement, a practice of response. What would it be like to touch the clouds? What would it be like to touch water in the air? Ultrasonic misters breaks the surface of water into small droplets that then bounce against transparent plaques to come together and create turbulent fog masses, small clouds. Ventilators at the back push these small clouds through honeycomb filters, and small clouds combine into bigger clouds. The apparatus is alive. Water percolates as it rushes through tubing and hums pumping tunes. An animal, a dragon, a serpent perhaps, breathing clouds. Failing clouds, bubble clouds, swirling clouds, spiraling clouds, tornado clouds, little clouds, big clouds, pathy clouds, exploding clouds, tunneling clouds, clouds, breaths. Being close enough to touch, to sense, to feel, to interact with. Breath sounds. A polyphony played by an orchestra of different electrical signals. You are invited to come forward, to touch, to feel, to entangle with yourself. Clouds, to respond halfway between earth and sky. Imagination augments the sense of touch by activating poetics, which is a touchable sensitivity of intimacy that puts us in touch with the possibilities for sensing the insensible, the indeterminate. Like the invisible to the human eye water drop that becomes visible through the touch of the camera, poetics brings forward the practice of engagement. Poetics is not the means of expressing of the subject, nor the means to represent an object, but it is an act, a way of leaving the door of invitation open that allows the other, the stranger, to present themselves, vulnerable and naked. And maybe only then, in the intimacy of touch, in the intimacy of an extended hand in the dark, we are able to embrace the inhumane, the heartless, callous, and caring, and kind or cruel that is always part of us, and enact the ethical response ability, that we are indebted with. The Mist Collector project brings forward phenomenological engagement with water, with the other that is never totally separate, by inviting participants to reopen themselves to the ethical responsiveness of accepting the invitation to respond. It is through the forest of imagination that we are able to enact change and create justice in what it means to live responsibly, together, apart, with all sentience on this planet, in the cosmos, and with water.
Hello, this Waterways project presentation is presented by Aleksandra Dulic and Miles Thorogood from the University of British Columbia. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which this presentation is recited is the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan peoples. In this presentation, we discuss the Waterways project that uses a research creation approach to bridge scientific, indigenous, artistic, and humanistic perspectives within the media-rich, data-driven visualizations. The resulting visualizations employ the use of interactive media technologies and software design to form a platform for dialogue across community-based, poetic, and scientific water knowledges. The project synthesizes important water knowledge and research in order to catalyze greater ecological awareness and promote more sustainable water use practices among Okanagan residents. The work explores the multiple meanings that water holds for the many communities and interest groups in the valley, including Indigenous Okanagan communities, environmentalists, artists, agriculturalists, forests, and tourists. By weaving together multiple community stories, diverse water knowledge, and artistic expression, the visualizations provide a setting for our complex local understanding of water. Acknowledging the sustainable practices of the Okanagan people on this land, we engage in a design methodology for creating an experiential learning environment that aligns with the holistic approach evident in Indigenous ways of regenerating and developing important communal practices. This methodology tightly integrates many ways of knowing through story, song, and creative expression. Expressing sustainability practices through aesthetic experience allows multiple ways of knowing and understanding of our environment to be represented holistically. Spaces designed to foster creative thinking and meaningful interactions through thoughtful, multi-sensory composition are instruments to evoke participants' unique memories and associations of place in the given cultural and environmental context. Through experience design, Hazenzahl details how these spaces motivate and expand the cognitive impressions and shared experiences of participants by creating positive and personally meaningful interactions. Researchers recognize that it is important to make the complexity of climate change and sustainability practices more accessible by making the concepts locally relevant and concrete, grounded in experiential learning, and situated in interactive media environments. For instance, climate change communication experts have found that visualizations can convey strong messages quickly, condense complex information, engage people in environmental challenges, and motivate personal action. In the field of interaction design, engaging experiences that embed positive aesthetic stimulation and use narratives as a dramatic structure enable more effective access to the challenging content. Interactivity can also provide a space of connection with other participants in collaborative activities, creating a sense of being part of a larger social structure. Interactive visualizations provide an experiential learning environment that facilitates a space for ontological reflexivity, which is the process of integrating alternative ways of knowing through multisensory experience that activates reflection, lateral thinking, and an intuitive grasp of concepts. Interactive visualizations involve the design of spaces for human reflection, where the emotional and sensual aspects of interaction are as important as the intellectual aspects of a given experience. Researchers have been working to develop better methods of decision-making using emerging tools such as machine scientific modeling, visualizations, and community engagement. We are bringing these interdisciplinary streams, including scientific and cultural knowledge, with the design process to co-create interactive 3D environments for communicating culturally grounded solutions. The unique aspect of our research creation methodology is bringing different streams of science and design with indigenous knowledge and philosophy together into 3D visualizations. Through the Waterways Project, we demonstrate how scientific, academic, and practice-based communication can delve deeply into the place-based concepts and water sustainability challenges and solutions. The Waterways Project is a community-based research project that engages interactive media to investigate the nature of human-water relationships in the Okanagan Valley. The focus of this presentation addresses human-water relationships through an exploration of pre-contact visualizations of Mill and Mission Creeks and the Penticton River. The visualizations meant to provide a creative platform for dialogue across diverse community-based, poetic, traditional, and scientific water knowledges of the past, present, and to aid in envisioning a sustainable water futures in the Okanagan Valley. The aim of this project is a framing and reframing of the problem setting, working towards the creation of a reflective space for place-based communal knowledge sharing. Waterways Project act as a platform for interdisciplinary research, visioning, and visualizations of local sensitive ecosystems across Indigenous and Western perspectives. The project aims to make the complexity of sustainability and ecosystem protection practices more accessible through locally and culturally relevant 3D visualizations of past and present, to extend the knowledge about local ecology towards the resilient futures. Social learning and capacity building in the context of waterways projects involves the engagement of multiple stakeholders and water knowledge to highlight the possibilities for community action. We investigate the ways that scientific data, community reflections, and traditional knowledge can come together in 3D visualizations to help communities accelerate dialogue toward finding solutions to place-based environmental challenges. Interactivity within 3D visualizations allow active learning and engagement. They provide accessible and experiential representations of complex systems. The participants can make decisions, receive feedback, and collaborate. And they provide an opportunity for reflection, discovery, exploration, and challenge. Moreover, they enable experiential learning through both cognitive and affective engagement with complex ideas. The Waterways Project uses the design as an inquiry to utilize the technique of decision-making, analysis, and synthesis in action. This approach enables the exploration of multiple and often contradictory experimental spaces for co-development of concepts and representations of numerous present and future solutions to real-world challenges. Contextual knowledge encompasses all the relevant information gathered. While this information includes measurable data and scientific models, it also integrates the less tangible aspects in a culture, such as knowledge embedded in stories, oral traditions, feelings, and other relevant social actions. The local 3D visualizations are based in 3 locales within the Okanagan Valley. Firstly, Mission Creek, which includes the visualization of kokanee salmon recovery efforts. The Mill Creek area floodplain in the downtown region, and Penticton River visualizations. The locals focus on the historical characteristics of Mission Creek, Mill Creek, and Penticton River, and their tributary creeks and wetlands in the floodplain area. The visualizations represent knowledge regarding ecological changes within the floodplain area. in order to express possibilities for better care for creeks, wetlands, and riparian habitat in the Okanagan area in the future. Each visualization has historical, contemporary, and future layers that can be explored. Historical visualizations of the Okanagan landscape are based on diverse records that refer to the Okanagan landscape before settlers developed the valley. We draw participation from Indigenous Silex communities in order to include and visualize elder accounts, from naturalist records, historical agricultural descriptions, as well as the Okanagan Historical Society's publication of local history writings since 1925. We brought together historical and area photographs, archival maps of land tenure, irrigation district records, leases, and ownership, as well as reconstructed terrestrial ecosystems mapping for the periods between 1800 and 1938 with the raw data. Contemporary visualizations of the Okanagan landscape are constructed based on publicly accessible geospatial data from the BC Data Warehouse and Google Map records. These provide information dealing terrestrial ecosystem mapping, vegetation resource inventory, sensitive ecosystem inventory, lakes and streams, wetlands, public land tenure and leases, and community watershed boundaries. Future visualizations of the Okanagan landscape are based on the user interactions, where the past can be combined with the present to create a personal account of possible futures. The content is designed to teach people what the areas used to look like and what we have lost with the rapid development. This information is significant for understanding how we could restore the area based on the local ecology, plants and animals, and what we can work towards. It provides essential understanding of local sensitive ecosystems critical for the restoration initiative and wildlife connectivity, including species corridors, and ways in which we can regenerate local ecosystems. The visualizations point to communicating urgency in terms of frequency of floods caused by climate change and rapid development. The visualizations communicate already known and successful solutions within the context of the Okanagan. The content is focused on supporting Indigenous rights and identifies Indigenous leadership in the context of many successful restoration initiatives, such as bringing both ocean and landlocked salmon populations back to the Okanagan creek systems. It points to the way we can rewild the Okanagan city areas, highlighting the ways we can make changes at neighborhood areas and mobilize citizen initiatives. The research creation methodology presented in this presentation builds upon design as an inquiry to utilize the technique of decision-making, analysis, and synthesis in action. This approach enables the exploration of multiple and often contradictory experimental spaces for the co-development of concepts and representations of numerous present and future solutions to real-world challenges. The media-rich, data-driven visualizations can create a platform for dialogue across community-based, poetic, and scientific water knowledge that brings scientific, Indigenous, artistic, and humanistic perspectives together. An essential part of this work is the integration of measurable scientific models with cultural knowledge that form a holistic research paradigm. Indigenous approaches to research are conducted through relational accountability, which means that responsibility, relevance, as well as respect for and reciprocal engagement with all living beings is considered. The overarching values and beliefs exemplified by the methodologies of conducting research place the researcher within a circle of relations. These ideas provide a research context for co-designing and visualizing local sustainability solutions. Using the Waterways project as an example, we demonstrate using our research creation approach to explore the nature of human-water relationships in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada. Waterways act as a platform for interdisciplinary research, visioning and visualizations of local sensitive ecosystems across Indigenous and Western perspectives. The project synthesizes water knowledge and research to catalyze greater ecological awareness and promote more sustainable water use practices among Okanagan residences. The work explores the multiple meanings that water hold for the many communities and interest groups in the Valley. The research creation methodology presented here enables weaving of multiple community stories, scientific modeling, diverse water knowledge, and artistic expression to create visualizations for our local understanding of water. Thank you for listening to the Waterways presentation.
From Guanajuato University in Mexico. We are in the Planetary Waterways panel. I want to talk first about our participants. Chanelle Lalonde from McGill University. She's a PhD candidate in art history at McGill University. Prior to pursuing her doctoral studies, she obtained a master in art history from Concordia University and a BFA in painting and drawing from the University of Ottawa. Her current research, which is supported by a Joseph Armand Bombardier CGS doctoral scholarship, explores the work of contemporary artists who attend to human-non-human relations in the context of ongoing environmental degradation and climate change. Anna Rewakowicz is an interdisciplinary Polish-born artist living and working in Montreal and Paris, known for her stimulating, interactive, and inflatable works that question our relationship with the environment. She is concerned with issues of sustainability and the need for interdisciplinary collaborations to face growing environmental challenge. Currently, driven by a desire to contribute to imagine solutions that can improve living conditions and create a more acute awareness of the global water situation. Aleksandra Dulic, she is an associate professor of the Department of Creative Studies at UVCO, is an artist scholar with expertise in interactive art, climate change, communication, and media for social change. She is the director of the Center for Culture and Technology and leads an interdisciplinary research team that engages multiple forms of art, media, and information technologies as vehicles for the expression of community culture and identity. Dulic's research is centered on the creation of interactive systems and experiences that bring local, cultural, and communal resources to the forefront. Miles Thorogood is an artist engineer at the University of British Columbia with research centered around the practice and theory in media arts for developing interactive experiences. He engages with qualitative and quantitative methods toward cutting-edge research in the development of computational systems for community-engaged artistic creation. Miles' research contributions have produced new knowledge in the fields of soundscape studies, affective computing, and cognitive science, focusing on sound design practice. What a panel we have today. Well, first I have a question for Lalonde. Chanelle, do you consider through soundscape audiences can have thought-provoking experience about human activity and provoke a change?
Thanks for the question. I do think that that's essentially what the artworks that I talked about are working towards, is trying to create this sort of affective relationship with the sounds that they include in the installations. Though I do find it kind of challenging to sort of make any sort of assumption about the listener and like what that relationship might become. So I tend to look more at the strategies or the conditions that an artist may use to create a space where such relations or awareness may occur without necessarily talking about the specific outcomes, because I'm not sure that I can, yeah. We can't hear you.
Yeah. As I was saying, as a researcher, I want to know more about your research methodology. What are the problems you have to face in order to finish this, or maybe it's an ongoing research?
That is the question for me again?
Yeah.
Okay. So a challenge, I guess, is just, I mean, my research initially started to look at ecological art and art that can raise awareness about sustainability, but also has like an activist component to it, which I think is extremely important. And I think that my interests lie there, but what I'm heading towards now is a bit more, I guess, less instrumental in the sense that the work occurs more like in these installations where there's not necessarily like a component of mitigation or, you know, there's no, it's instrumental, if I can say that. And I think that that is sort of my challenge in thinking about how that can actually contribute in important ways to issues like climate change and environmental degradation.
Please, if the other participants have a question for Michelle, for Chanelle, feel free to do so.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, lovely work you presented. And I was wondering in your response to methodology and the evaluation, we do a bunch of didactic museum work, which includes some artistic components and some didactics. You may call them instrumental, but you know, educational components. But do you think, and we do often evaluate those exhibitions because they are one of the key goals is education, and it really helps to understand what the audience is getting out of. But I wonder, in a more artistic context, do you think it would be useful to evaluate audiences' response in a sense to be able to understand how the cultural shifts happen and, you know, what the role of art may be, and in that more experiential, poetic way and non-didactic and instrumental way?
Thank you for that question. I think that that's a really good, that's something that I think that's one of the big challenges that I face in my research, because I want to think more about the actual effects of this work, because I think, especially when thinking through issues of climate change and environmental degradation, it's hard to not want to, you know, see how this is like concretely helping or, you know, potentially actually changing perceptions and things like that. But in the work of Harbin and Barclay that I presented, I think that what's happening is there's a way in which the artists are trying to make the non-human or more than human beings that they record and interact with see, or they try to represent them in a way that is more that has agency or that is sentient. And I think that the reason why I struggle a bit to think about what the actual outcomes are is because I think that that's for some viewers or listeners, there will be like, this will be a revelation, but for other listeners or viewers, this will not be a revelation. But I do think that it would be worth thinking about the audience or the outcomes on potentially people who didn't see it that way before, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. For Anna, I really enjoyed your presentation. It's really poetic and really nice to hear. Also, can you tell us more, please, about the meaning and the matter when you said the meaning and the matter are inseparable?
Thank you for the question. This is very much in the context of agential realism by Karen Barat. So I guess fundamentally it's difficult to understand, but and she proposes something that it's really majority of time we are not used to, at least within Western cultures. And it is the inseparability between ontology and epistemology. So it is basically what we know and how we know it. So in the West, we are very much develop theories, you know, about agency. So there is something that exists outside of us. And then we trying to get to know, well, if basically there's no difference, then what we know is no basically how we are trying to get to know something. We are in the process of creating what we know. So therefore, it is inseparable. So we create all the time. We create the meaning, and we create that meaning with what we do. So our practices matter, and yeah, it's both material. I mean, Barat makes a distinction between you know, theory and materials, like meaning physicality. It's the same. So so yeah, I think the most important part is that we are creating all the time by relating by interacting, but she says interacting, which is the ontological inseparability, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Really philosophical approach. You talk about Aboriginal history, or about human spirit that jump to ancestral waters to materialized and become visible. What culture was that?
That was Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal people.
Australia.
That's, yes, it's Veronica Strunk. She's an anthropologist. She worked a lot with Aboriginal Australians people. So that story comes from her research. Yeah.
Nice. Another participant question from another participant, Gianna, please. Do you have one question for her?
I just have a comment. What a lovely work.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very
Actually,
much.
I have a quick comment again, question. I'm very much inspired by John Robinson's take on regenerative sustainability, where he's speaking about every action matters. How can we have every action we do make a positive contribution to the environment? It's very much aligned with what you're saying. So everything we do matters. So can every action we take make
Yes.
positive contribution towards the water, right? And
yes, I mean, yeah, it's very true. And Barat is very much about quantum physics, and I think it's very interesting in physics that there is actually no concrete line that separates us from anything. So the boundaries are very much fluid, and that's very interesting. You know, like when you hold a cup of tea or coffee, I mean, there is not necessarily a specific boundary between your hand and the cup. When you start thinking about it, it really sort of changes the way you can approach everything. Yeah.
Okay, for Miles, and do you have a question from the public? Miles and Alex. Let me see. Could you discuss your methods of interaction with indigenous peoples and knowledge?
This project, the visualizations are a kind of outcome of the research that we conducted with a larger team, and one of the co-investigator and silk artist and knowledge keeper, Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, is a part of our project. And also we have another anthropologist on the team, John Wagner, and complexity science team member, Lael Parrott. So we have spent lots of time doing archival research, collecting the stories, participating in events, to actually choose which of the visualizations we're going to create. And this is a still work in progress. We will have presentation now postponed next fall of those visualizations. So we're still building them, but they kind of came from the community. The choices we made are based on the most important projects in our community right now. So we've been following the 20-year project, which was the return of the salmon. It's a successful restoration of sockeye in Okanagan because they were almost extinct 20 years ago. Another project is Onalkan Center's project, which is in Penticton, Eco Community Center. It's a restoration of cottonwoods, riparian environments. So we're kind of working with projects that are important for our community, then visualizing them and bringing them further to the foreground to understand what is successful about them and how can we take those successes into best practices for future projects that might take place in the Okanagan around water.
Okay. Do you have results of this project? And excuse me, Miles, do you have results, a positive repercussion on the community, on the Okanagan community?
What do you mean by results? I'm not sure.
A change of attitude, a change of...
We have not on this one. We haven't presented our work yet. We're still, because everything got delayed because of COVID, we postponed it for next fall. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. We do have results from previous work we've done of such. And as I was saying, we did apply a visual matrix method, which I encountered few years back at a CA presentation. I thought, wow, this is a really great method for evaluation when especially when you're dealing with a more experiential and non-didactic material. And that was very valuable to actually see. I think people who went through the evaluation process got more out of the exhibition than anybody else, because it's a kind of group brainstorming process where you work with images. So all I'm saying, we do evaluate every project of such, and then we use those ideas for further development. So no, this one, it hasn't been evaluated, but we do have a cycle of integration and approvals process. So we won't publish anything until it gets approved by all the partners, like Okanagan Nation Alliance and all the people who we interviewed. So yeah, it's a kind of co-design process, so lots of back and forth.
Anna, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So I just would like to understand. So this project, like intent of it is educational, and in a sense. So in which context do you I guess I should ask, what kind of context do you imagine to present this project?
It's a museum exhibition.
So it's a
So
museum exhibition.
we're working a lot with local museums, and then it will be a touring exhibition. So for the entire Okanagan. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, and so what we've been looking at also is how to engage the broader audience by making interactive experiences online also. So we've been, I guess, experimenting with the various kinds of technologies that allow for us to have multimodal 3D visualizations online. And that's also another vehicle that we might explore for pushing this out to a wider audience to communicate the message.
So even just revealing those maps, I don't know, you probably don't remember. We could have did a little bit better editing of our presentation, but we have these, what is Kelowna look like now and what it was before, and the change is so dramatic that actually even just seeing it on the map is rather enlightening. But lots of changes in aesthetics of our place, so much so that it's hard to recognize which plants are local. There's only 2% of original cottonwoods in environments. And there's so many changes that actually bringing the plant and the animal and their role in regulating the waterways around the Okanagan Lake is a really important educational step, and 3D visualizations are a really good tool to do that. So,
yeah, and,
so does that?
I was just going to follow up from Aleksandra, just to say that in the Kelowna and the Okanagan area at this time, there's at the municipal level a lot of planning about how to mitigate the floodwaters that happen, especially in Mill Creek. And just sort of the medium and longer term planning for the water and creek systems here in the Okanagan. So this project is also helping to inform and to visualize and contribute to planning changes on that kind of level too.
So I guess I'll follow just up. So exactly, I guess my question was, so there is a local community that is working on these changes, or they are happening as you presenting, or is it a future project? Or
so we decided to represent future based on the two projects that are very successful, that are Indigenous led, which was the return of the salmon and the restoration of cottonwoods in the Eco Community Center. So building from the successful projects as if future is now, to bring them forward, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you are basically presenting what we need to do in order to make changes to,
or why are these especially a big idea is. Both of those projects were led by traditional ecological knowledge keepers, and Return of the Salmon is 20-year project, rather complex, lots of cross-governmental, federal government, municipal government. There's so many layers and barriers that have been lifted to bring the fish back. So that's interesting. Why is that project successful, and then what can we learn from it?
Yeah. So then, how can we, extrapolate on those, positive contributions to other challenges that we're having here in the Okanagan? Some of our preliminary research was looking at taking data points from, traditional knowledge to what we have with settler accounts and data, and then projecting as to where the future was going to be, instead of going into that relatively bleak place, we wanted to have a look at how positive change can make a difference for the betterment of the environment and people.
And I do want to say we do use interviews as well. It's not in this presentation because we haven't integrated, but it's all based on interviewing the knowledge keepers, scientists who are working on these projects, and the government officials and so on.
Okay. Have you considered, by any chance, to make a model of your project? Because I'm thinking about we have 68, almost 68 different ethnic groups, indigenous groups in Mexico. So if we could learn about your project and apply your project in our communities, could be a lot of benefit. I could not imagine my city, for example, the way it looks before the mines. We have a lot of minery activity here in Guanajuato. So have you ever considered make a book, or not only a paper, but a book that shows the method that you follow to do this artistic project?
Yeah, well, this is a university project, so we had an army of students modeling all the plants. That took a year. Now we have all the plants. Now it's easier to paint environments. But, just going, yes, maybe we will put a publication at the end when we're ready, because we do have a show, so we were planning on doing the catalog. Yeah.
But then also some research creation framework for conducting similar research in different locations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We made a really good contacts in Chile too with one of indigenous engineer. It's a lovely idea, because if you can see the past and present, and what if we can poke some of the present to leave, for the future. It's good to know the rates of change. We're so immersed in our environments that we are not even aware. So yeah, thank you for that question.
You're welcome. I believe Chanelle, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering in terms of, because you mentioned that for Miles and Alex, about how these works are usually experienced, or the plan is to exhibit it in a museum setting. Is it like is it like 2D works, but also immersive environments? Like, what does that sort of look like, or are these visualizations actually experienced in the gallery space?
So we're gonna have a multi-channel video installation where we will also have usually one of the knowledge keeper or scientists would be on one screen, and another screen you'll see environment of the past, present, or future. Or so it's going to be a multi-channel video installation. And because I don't think it looks like we will not be able to use touch screen, but we'll see what happens in the fall.
Where can we, this is a question for Anna. Where can we see your artistic work? The Mist Collector Water, I believe. Have you presented in museums or galleries?
Yes. You are very welcome to see my website. It's www.riwana.com, or you simply just Google my name, I suppose. And you can see some my artworks for over 20 years. So you can see different artworks. And the Mist Collector project, there is a link from my website to another website group at that you can see some of the videos, documentation from the presentations of all these three projects that I presented, because I presented today a video, large scale video projection that was projected on the site of the building. So that presentation was at during Nuit Blanche in Paris, and the cloud machine, nephelograph, it was also presented during the Nuit Blanche in Paris. And then Misty Way actually is also installation was supposed to be presented. It is presented at the virtual exhibition in the Planetary program. So you are very welcome to go and see it there. obviously it's a immersive environment, so it's very difficult to really get a real sense what it is like, but the video is there, so you can definitely see it. Yeah.
Yeah, very inspiring work, though. And do you work with engineers or with another professionals like Miles did?
The Mist Collector project is it's a collaboration between myself and scientists at l'École Polytechnique in Paris. So this project is very much driven by scientific research of improving efficiency of collection of water from fog, which is a very important method in the very dry areas in the world, especially in the South, for example, America, in the West Coast of both Americas, also in West Coast of Africa, like in Morocco. So there are many places in the world that fog water becomes the only source of water. And in Morocco, for example, it's one of the biggest in the world site of collection of water from fog, and is managed by this great NGO, Darcy Mad, and basically they are providing water to fog water to local communities that otherwise would not have a running water in their household. And in those, there are small barbers communities, and in those communities, it's usually women who spend majority of their time fetching water, most of the time walking a long distance, many hours, to back and forth. So therefore, bringing the water to those remote communities, it makes a very big social change. And when I was visiting them in 2017, actually, it was really amazing because I participated. It was another person that was doing a workshop, a kind of literary workshop with these women. So it was amazing to see that, because bringing water to those households allows them to have more free time. And in basically this free time, they are organizing workshops, and many of these women don't know how to write or read. So those workshops are to kind of empower them, and also empower them because traditionally it was women who was considered like they manage the water. But now, since it's becoming, how to put it, since technology is changing, so it's becoming kind of more engineering. So the purpose of this workshop was also to give women other tools so they can still maintain the management of water, rather than this technology transferring the knowledge back to men. Because so it was also a workshop that they use a telephone, and they develop a specific system to alert if there is a problem and it has to be repaired, etc., etc. So this is just one example of this technology being used, but I guess maybe I diverted from your question. Yes, this project is very much a collaboration between scientists, two scientists from École Polytechnique, Camille Duprat, physicist, and physicist Jean-Marc Chomas at École Polytechnique in Paris. Yeah.
Okay. The same happens in Mexico. The women are the responsible to walk long distances to carry water to one place to another. It's an unfortunate problem around the world. Yeah. I have a question for, has anybody have a question for Anna?
Yeah, I have a question for Anna. Just regarding the collaboration between artistic and science-based methods, do you find that there is an interdisciplinary exchange where the scientist learns something from the artist at the same time as the artist from the scientists?
I think so. In our case, I think it was very, especially at the beginning, I was very closely working with physicist Camille Duprat, and basically through working literally together, so we had to overcome our linguistic differences, not just in the sense of whether it's a French or English, no, but in meaning language differences in the sense of the language used in the disciplines. So, but I think we were working side by side, and we were making together, we were doing different experiments. And I think through this material practice, which I guess it's very close to all my practice for, as I said, for over 20 years, it's very materially based. It was a connection, and through that, experience, we came up with a new paradigm for collecting water from fog, which is what I was saying in the video. Like, standard model is a grid, and which causes a lot of problem talking physically, that there is a clog and that prevents drainage. So our new paradigm of collecting water with parallel flexible fibers came very much through interaction between myself and Camille Duprat. And then later on, that became a metaphor of a new research, which is ongoing research. I mean, it has not been sort of concluded, but there was another PhD science student who did a quantifying experiments that do point to a possibility that it is a sort of, let's say, a more efficient way of collecting water from fog. So this is ongoing process, and all these artworks are collaborative pieces. So they are all between basically myself and Camille Duprat and Jean-Marc Chomas. Yes, so yeah.
There's a comment from the public. It says, there is a gendered experience around water resources. Women are often more tasked with domestic water in the house for cooking, bathing, etc., while men are often decision makers around water convenience for agriculture. Anyone who wants to talk more about water and gender would be helpful. And as example is really important.
Thank you.
And then I have a question for Chanelle. You said your research was were investigating broader soundscape artists. What are those? Who are those artists? Sorry, I'm tired.
So I'm very much at the beginning of my dissertation project, but so far I'm become interested in works that in sound art, but also works that sometimes only refer to sound without actually being sonorous, if that makes sense. And so I'm interested in works that, like the ones that I presented, where, you know, they sort of create this immersive environment with recordings and that sort of thing, but also works by Rebecca Belmore, like Wave Sound, where she placed these cone-like sculptures in different national parks, and they face these bodies of water and ask us to sort of listen to these bodies of water, which I think is extremely interesting and has to do with listening and sound and all of that. So I'm interested in works like that, where I guess you could think about the sound component being in real time as well. But yeah, also some really interesting works about plant communication. And I was thinking specifically about one by Christine Udlin, where she like visualizes the way that plants express their stress, or when they're being attacked by different organisms, like how they would react. But it's of course not accurate, because it's like visually depicting a sound that we can't necessarily hear. So those are the types of works that I've been looking at lately.
Where can we read more of your research?
It's in the very early stages, so I don't really have any online platform yet, but I know that my presentation, or the written version of my presentation, will be in the conference proceedings.
So the audience can contact you by your email that is on the proceedings book. Okay, thank you.
I have a question to Chanelle. Have you experienced the works that you wrote about? Have you physically been in these artworks?
I've experienced Calder Harbin's work, and for Leah Barclay, I haven't been to fully experience the work. You have to be by the river in Australia, which I haven't been able to do, but I have listened to all the recordings on my phone with earphones, like it's meant to be experienced. But yeah, I'd love to experience it soon.
We have another question from Miles and Aleksandra. It's this question. Miles and Alex, how do you counter the extractive tendency of colonial systems of knowledge production in your project?
Well, it's beyond just knowledge production. We work in a system, I guess one way in which we're dealing with that is by talking about projects that have lifted many barriers. And in knowledge, for example, the Return of the Salmon project that we're focusing on is Indigenous-led project. It was led by elders, so the traditional ecological knowledge, Silk's knowledge is foundation for the project. And then this incredible effort over 20 years, where now the fisheries of Okanagan Nation Alliance have 40 scientists employed for that project. They started with one person 20 years ago. And the way the traditional ecological knowledge and the science work together to protect the environment is very impressive. So I guess by highlighting those collaborations and those successful relationships is one way to find the pathways to actually use the best of both worlds. That's one strategy.
Okay, thank you, Aleksandra. We have 2 minutes. Do you have last words for our audience? Anna, do you want to begin?
Well, I just would like to thank everybody for being here and listening to all our presentations in the panel. And yes, and again, I would like to invite you to check my other work in the exhibition and through my website as well. And thank you to other panelists for presenting your projects, and thank you as well for being our moderator. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Chanelle?
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to the rest of the presentations, and it was really great to get to know about both of your projects. Thank you.
And Aleksandra and Miles, last words. You have a minute or less.
Sure, I would echo the sentiments and feelings of fellow panelists. Thanks everyone for coming to the presentations today. I wish we're all here together. We could grab coffee or some other kind of beverage, but here's to the future.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was so lovely to learn about your projects, and thank you for the moderating, and thank you for the audience. So.
See you at the next presentations. Thank you to all all the public we had. Thank you for the presentations, for the presentators, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.